Good afternoon. I want to welcome all of you again for joining. We had an opportunity before we started this recording to just do some greetings and me to acknowledge you in the space and being able to show up in spite of everything we no doubt have on our plates and are thinking about. So today is really an opportunity to bring you together before we close out the year and really move into what is the most enjoyable and impactful time of the year for me, which is our commencement and end of the year graduations. I had the great luxury to attend our Native student graduation, Honorando, our Lavender graduation, our Asian Pacific Islander graduation, and looking forward to the Celebration of Excellence graduation later this evening. And then the crescendo, right, which is our curbside commencement, to be able to celebrate our students, but I think more importantly, to celebrate the work that we've all done that's been very hard over this last year. The work that is a buildup over many years of commitment, many years of service, and many years of love for our students and community and one another. So I wanted to create space to really try to create continuity. I started in January. I'm an enigma to many of you, and certainly have tried to close the space as much as possible, but have work to do, have much to learn about the American River College history and family, and certainly to learn with each one of you about our direction moving forward. So over this past year, we've had to juggle a lot of impact while continuing to do the great work that we do. And so I'd like to take just the first few minutes of our time together today to try to create some continuity from my perspective and level set us a little bit from my entry to now. And then I'd like to pause and be a really good listener and turn the space over to all of you, whether that is your voices or in chat, really wanting to hear about the year, the semester in particular since I've arrived, and things that we need to be considering as we wrap up this year, but more importantly, forge towards summer and fall together. As our faculty go off contract, it's very important for me that we don't come back in fall semester and see a place that is unrecognizable. So a purpose of today's conversation and level set is where are we now, and creating some reassurances that that's where we'll be when we arrive in fall. And we'll continue the conversations of what this whole year has meant and what changes we need to make to continue to make good on our commitments, our goals, our desires and values. So with that being said, I'd like to share my screen just very momentarily. It's one slide. And it's really, again, my level set slide with you all so I can be held accountable as your president, your newest member of the family. So when I arrived for convocation, for those of you that were able to attend, I arrived kind of with themes. I recognized when I chose to pursue this particular role that it was going to be a really hard time, that there were going to be many challenges, that emotions would be high, that there would be a lot of unanswered questions. And one of the reasons that I chose to pursue in spite of all of that is that I like to be a really good listener. I like to work with people. I care about people's well-being, success, and comfort. And so I believed as a leader that I had something to offer. And so the themes, if you all recall, were really this notion of hope, healing, and handling business. And it's about how we do that together, anchoring our work and our commitments to equity and social justice, and quite frankly, an exemplary teaching and learning environment where people can show up and be proud of the institution they serve, but also committed to the communities by which they serve. So the hope in which we've set out this semester on was really around how can we get back connected? How can we find some sense of normalcy? How can we come out of what we would call a triple pandemic, right? The wellness or the health pandemic, the economic pandemic as a result of that, and the crisis and pandemic that's been illuminated around social justice, hate, racism, and prejudice and bias. So we talked about that and trying to acknowledge that there is light at the end of the tunnel, even though it may have been very bleak at the time that I arrived. We then talked about this notion of hope is one thing, but we have to heal. We have to acknowledge what has transpired. Loss of loved ones, loss of connection to the college, loss of understanding about where we're headed and our identity, right? Whether it be discipline, service, program, college, all of that. What is the identity that's evolving? And how do I take some control over my own destiny and the destiny of those that I care about as colleagues and students and community? So we've put together some activities, and these activities weren't for everybody, right? Not everybody's into that. My life is in a different place and I can't engage in that way. But we put together some activities. We did the fondue together and about 40 families came together, and it was exciting and certainly powerful for me as a new member of this family that is only getting to know folks in this virtual space, not having touched foot on campus with you all and being able to bond in ways in which I'm most comfortable, which is talking to people, hugging on people, learning about people, their stories, their experience, and expertise and contributions. We also did an improv. So we had a faculty member be a trailblazer and step up and do some improv for us. We had an opportunity to come together last night for a vigil to talk about our loss, but our gratitude as well, and where we can go together. And handling business is just what we are called to do. We're servants for our communities and our students. And so handling business is not something we have the luxury of stopping. And so that is the theme by which we came forward. Lots of conversation between the January arrival of convocation and now. Much of my energy has been looking at our resources. How do we support innovation? How do we support development in an environment that's rapidly changing? And we need to keep up with that, keep our tools sharp, keep our tools plentiful. We need a variety of them with the things that we're trying to tackle. So my responsibility is bringing resources to bear, being a really good listener, figuring out where we're situated at as a part of our district family, but also as the American River College family. So with that being said, some of those meetings led to the last week's discussion around the summit for the future of Los Rios. And what I know about that and the feedback that I received from individuals that I respect a lot is that it felt like there wasn't an opportunity to express feelings, concerns, questions, opportunities, and ideas. So as a wrap up for our semester, I want to create that space. I wanted to level set on what it is that we came in this semester moving together with these themes. And I also want to be able to understand what I need to respond to as I send out a communication next week, celebrating all of you for the things that you've done to help our students cross the finish line, but also the many things that we have to do and the much listening ahead in order to tackle the challenges that still exist. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to turn my attention to all of you. I'd ask that you raise your hand so I can make sure that every voice that we can capture in this space gets captured. That voice may be one of comment. That voice may be a question. You can add comments, questions in the chat, and I'll be responsive there as well. And as always, every time we come together, if it's something that we cannot achieve today, we will follow up. I will respond. And sometimes that response may not be satisfying to the palate, but until it is, I'll continue to respond. So with that being said, I want to pause and thank all of you for the hard work, for graciously embracing me into the college in spite of the challenges and not knowing me as well as you probably would have had I been on the ground. And I'd like to hear your thoughts about the future summit or anything that's on your mind that we need to be aware of as we forge ahead together. Thank you all for joining me this afternoon and sharing your thoughts. Okay, I don't see hands raised. So I'm now going to say, speak freely in this space that's ours together. Is there anyone that has feedback around this semester? Ideas about considerations that need to be mulled over and discussed as we move forward and come back together in fall? Things that we might need to touch on at convocation, concerns that you have around our identity, any of those things, sharing of things that you've accomplished that deserve the ears of those in this space. Please feel free to unmute yourselves and share. Vicki, I see that your box is lit up, so I'm going to assume that you have sharing, and if not, I apologize, but please feel free to take the space if that is accurate.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, I guess it's kind of a question. I've heard in different meetings that that the campus has purchased laptop computers for everyone on campus. And I haven't heard much else about it since I heard that weeks ago. And I don't know what that looks like because I don't know when we're coming back. So if you could maybe expand on that. And I guess that would be a part two. Part two to that would be communication. Communication that things like this come out, but then they sort of just, float around for a while. And then you're not sure if it was a rumor or is it fact or, we just don't hear about it. And then all of a sudden it'll be, here's your laptop. So just the steps in communication, how things go.
Absolutely. So communication, I for one will say, yes, we got some breakdowns in communication. And part of that may be my lack of understanding of the cadence that folks are used to. And then I think obviously clarity around whether that history felt sufficient. My suspicion is a college our size, communication has never probably felt very sufficient. And so I am operating as your brand new president under that assumption. And so what the executive team and I have talked about are strategies by which we can resolve some of the breakdowns of communication. And a part of that will be the college sharing where those breakdowns exist that may be blind spots for us. So that is a continued conversation to respond at the 50,000 foot, 30,000 foot level. I think in response to your direct question about laptops, it is a moving target, if you will, and I apologize for the more aggressive language, but we have these HERF dollars that are coming in, and they're coming in droves, and we're trying to figure out how to utilize them in a way that is responsible, right, and in compliance with how those dollars can be spent. And I think the challenge for us is those dollars are being utilized in many different ways. And I'll give you a couple of examples. We have funding that's gone to our counseling area, right? Understanding that the impacts of being in the remote environment and that particular area in particular, having to adapt to that space and continue to create high touch, and in some instances, higher touch than we have before, requires more resources. Another example would be technology for faculty, right? That you've had faculty adapt to the space, are trying to figure out how to provide the quality educational environment that they have, sometimes with curriculum that quite frankly wasn't designed to be delivered in this particular modality. And so with that, there are tools and technologies that need to be brought to bear. So what's happening is an assessment on the back end, and then funding is kind of trickling out from there. Unfortunately, not the best approach for us as it relates to staying on top of the communication and sharing that ahead of time for folks. But the reality of it is we have an obligation now that we know to communicate it. So there are stipends around technology that are coming to bear around how we support instruction and all employees in this remote space, with the understanding that we'll be here for a little bit longer, right? And then the process for how you pick up and we distribute will be developed and sent out to the college. So there is been a little bit of a delay from when we understood we would be moving in some of these directions to developing a process of distribution, but those particular pieces will be shared out, and we'll walk you step by step through that particular process. Vicki, a really great question. And frankly, going to be similar questions related to that for other things, right? How do I access my office, right? And get the things that I need. And there are going to be timelines tied to that. Right now, August is the timeline, but there is a request process right now that you could go through to come to your office. So I want folks to know when you need to access your space, that is available. And if we're not conveying that very well, we certainly need to do so. So Vicki, I know that doesn't answer matter-of-factly the date, but please know we'll share the process, and please unmute yourself and share your other thought.
So thank you for answering all that. But so I guess my original request to my immediate boss was if I do come back, or when I am expected to come back, or whatever that day is, I will need that's how it kind of originated, is I'm going to need like a webcam, because all these Zoom meetings, if I'm on campus now, I won't have the right ability to do the things I need to do. So so that's going to have to be tied into people returning. They're going to have to know, like you were saying, what's going to be different. What are you returning to? So that's kind of like the connection that I made.
For sure. Let me raise you a little bit. We also have learned something, right? Now that we've gone into this remote space, it wasn't by our own doing or decision, it happened. And so how do we create technology infrastructure that is nimble enough for individuals to come to the ground, but if they had to scramble in a remote space again for whatever reason, that we had a plan in place. So I think what you'll find is this evolution or rollout of laptops in general to employees, right? So you build in that nimbleness with the understanding that there'll be stations for employees on the college campus, because many of our faculty and staff will come back to the college campus and continue business as they had prior to the pandemic or the remote movement. So I think webcams are going to be a part of the discussion. I think there's going to continue to be discussions about every single employee having a laptop and being able to adapt to whatever the environment brings. Many of that will come from our IT area. So our ABC of IT, Tamara Armstrong, is working with our Jeff Bookers of the world and our champions on our college campus to kind of determine what that looks like in collaboration with our Vice President of Administration. But Vicki, that is a legitimate request. And the reality of it is we'll be bringing the technology to bear for individuals to do the work that they need to do, with the understanding that there's probably not post-pandemic or post-return to campus an individual that is going to be in one place or another. You're likely going to be doing work that is remote, i.e. meetings, and then potentially coursework, instruction, service delivery on ground. So thank you for sharing your direct request. And the answer is there'll be a lot of those, and we'll have to respond to that with the resources, and HERF dollars will make that possible for us. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Others, please unmute yourselves. I see a hand up, Nemo. May I come to you? Is your hand raised?
No, it's Ramona. Thank you, Dr. President Melanie. Yeah, thank you.
Mona.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Wonderful.
I kind of want to piggyback off of what Vicki was mentioning, because you mentioned, the laptops for people and all that. However, going into this remote environment, I ended up purchasing, I'm just speaking for myself, and I don't know how many I would imagine other people had to do the same thing. I ended up purchasing my own computer, and even though I, use the loaner hotspots from the campus, with my kids and everything working from home, I ended up I'm now paying for the most expensive kind of internet service and everything. And so I was wondering, for those of us who may have had to ramp up our internet services because having just a hotspot in your home was not enough, will the HERF dollars be a part of the some type of stipend compensation for the extra dollars that it costs with the internet service and all the things that we had to do? I wouldn't need a laptop. I actually had to buy a brand new computer because my computer couldn't hold on to the work that I had to do. And I don't know how many other people this happened to, but I was wondering, how does that affect us? And is that a part of the planning process on laptops whenever that rolls out?
Yeah, so let me say to you that that's unfortunate. I wish we would have just understood the limitations of the technology and resolved that. But unfortunately, the movement and the pace may not have made that possible. So I'm sorry that you had to purchase that equipment, but such a great question. And so when I talk about the technology stipends, that's not a faculty constituency specific, right? That's our classified as well. So there will be a flat stipend. It will not be based on your cost per se. So you may find that you're going to get more than what it is that you paid for your laptop, and however you apply that. But the stipend is really around an acknowledgement that there has been an impact fiscally around technology and access to our employees, and that there is a resolution that we need to resolve with these dollars now that we have them, and that they're one time. And that is really the design of them, right? Is addressing the gaps or impacts of the pandemic. So the answer to you, Mona, is that you will get a stipend. Now you and I can have a sidebar about whether that closes what it is you output, but there will be a stipend and an acknowledgement across constituency groups. And I don't have that dollar amount because I think it's still yet to be determined. And I think it's based on some of these kind of experiences, is that what is the average amount that an employee would have paid out? And then what is a reasonable stipend to close some of those gaps? So that work is happening at the fiscal level, and certainly will be communicated out, but those stipends will come to bear, and it will be specifically for what you're referencing, and certainly what Vicki is referencing, but there will be a continuation of this work, no doubt. Thanks so much for that question, Mona. I see a question in the chat, and it's been there for a second, and I want to be responsive. And it says, preparing to meet students' needs for another fall that is predominantly remote. Will there be additional ways in which our students can access information and resources, and ways in which we as educators can better prepare them on how this will all be communicated? Absolutely. So I think one thing that I've acknowledged, and again, not judgment value, but as your new president, just looking around, trying to understand how things work from a student's perspective, but also as a lived experience from an employee, no matter what constituency group that you're a part of. And one of the things that I've noticed in meetings is that we share a lot of resources kind of verbally in spaces. And there's not really a repository or a location where these things are captured or presented in a way that's easily kind of digestible and to share, that it doesn't take a lot of effort for me to have to go sort through these things or identify the right person. So one of the jobs that we have as a college over the summer is really the work that's already been done. How do we bring it together in a way that's a resource for folks, right? For many of us that may have worked outside of the college, there's something called an intranet, right? Where it's typically the internal body, the resources, how you can navigate that in a seamless way. We need to create a format, and there is an infrastructure. We need to leverage that, I think, a little bit better and provide those resources in ways that are helpful. Let me give you a couple examples of that. We have all these support services, financial resources, basic needs resources, academic resources, activities that are happening outside of the classrooms, programs, right? And faculty may know that because they had a student in it and they learned about it. They may have partnered with that program before, but some faculty don't, and especially when I think about our adjunct. Or some employees don't. If they're a new classified professional that hasn't had an onboarding experience that showed them those resources. So our job would be, an example, providing a one-sheeter or some resource or a PowerPoint slide based on the preference of a faculty member and offering it up as something that they can embed in their Canvas shell as their first onboarding experience or first class, setting the classroom expectations. It may be in a department sharing that. Certainly, there's an onboarding process that we have to develop. It's a part of the plan of your institution prior to my arrival that we would create a robust onboarding experience for all constituency groups. So now it's about doing that, right? Bringing that expectation and value to life and bringing resources to bear electronically. And for those of us that are old school, in hard copy sometimes, right? So I think it's centralizing some of our information, making it easy to access for folks, and then keeping it updated and communicating effectively when new things happen or when things go away. And that's a cadence you have to get into. So we'll do that and we'll get better at doing it, but there's certainly work around that. And then I think to the other part of this question is about, will there be additional ways in which our students can access information and resource? Absolutely. So we know that there's incredible work happening in our library area and our tutoring area around creating some abilities for students to access on-ground resources in the remote environment. That isn't going to work for everyone. So over this summer, we're going to open up our LRC and be able to create safe spaces where students have access to resources, especially those that may be in digital deserts or may have some of the multi-generational challenges on Wi-Fi constraints. That's some of what Mona kind of highlighted too, that burden on your system and the ability for your technology to function. So that opportunity will be available to our students, and it's scheduled around really our course schedule. So Student Services has looked at the instructional calendar and realized how could we support students within that time frame, but also at the bookends of that, if there's study time or access to technologies that students need. So that'll be one way in which we do it as we move through summer and into fall. As we move through summer and into fall, you're going to see more and more services transitioning back down to the ground, right? The greater footprint of students, the greater footprint of services. And so that is the work that's happening under our Vice President of Student Services, as well as the deans and supervisors and specialists and SBAs and clerks within student services of understanding what makes sense to stay in a remote environment that is beneficial for students and what doesn't. My job with the team will be, how do we understand what that looks like and communicate that out to our college? Because it's definitely going to be different than what we're used to. And faculty and our classified professionals need to be able to access that information readily. So I hope that answered that question. If not, please ping me again in the chat. Let's see, Kevin. We made a decision, we will not offer study abroad until mid 2022 at the earliest. Do we know if we're restoring the program? In earnest, there has been no discussion about not restoring the program, but there has not been discussion about when. So the 2022 is the timeline that I have. There hasn't been a robust conversation about that at the tables that I've been at as of late, but I do know it's a consideration. And I think there's also a consideration about what does study abroad need to look like in an equity environment. Are there other considerations? Are there revamping of the program? Is there discussion that needs to be had as we continue to talk about rolling it back out? So I hope that's helpful, Kevin. Others, I can't see all the hands, so please use your voice, use the chat. All right, Vicki, I see your question here, and your question is, now that it has been determined that we need more technology to be reliant, let's see, ARCDO plan to grow our information technology groups to provide adequate support. It seems our IT folks, like many, are pretty tapped out, yes, and need to be more creative instead of, the hamster wheel. So I think the gist of this is how are we going to help the technological infrastructure, right? It's one thing about saying what the infrastructure needs to be and all of the things that we need to adopt. There's another thing about how do you staff that, sustain that, fund that in ways in which it's beneficial and responsive to the college. And I'm a firm believer that technology doesn't run the college, right? We decide what needs to happen and the technology supports us. And I think there's a few things that are really, really important. And the first thing is an inventory, which is work that our IT folks have done in collaboration with district IT folks across the district around what is our ecosystem technologically, right? What are the systems that we need? What systems may be duplicitous? What do we need to do to kind of clean up that? That's a resource consideration on one hand, but it's also a user experience consideration, right? If I am an employee that has to serve a student and I need to move in and out of multiple systems to answer a question, one, the probability for error increases, but two, it's just not a very effective utilization of the time of an individual, and it's frustrating. It's not a thoughtful technological solution. And so that work is happening. I know there's several conversations happening with IT about how we can be more robust in our ability and agility to respond to the IT needs. Specifically, now that we're in this remote environment, and we know that those needs are vast. right? And that as we return to the ground, there's still going to need to be this really large present of technological solutions that support the online modality, whether it be demand of students or whether it be the will of our faculty to transition in that way. So we know that. So I think one of the things that you'll find with some of the HERF dollars, much of them have gone to the IT area, right? To look at this infrastructure, do an analysis, and bring technologies to bear. And I think part of that is assessing what part of our technologies do we have the ability to utilize that we just haven't. There are many system opportunities within our platforms that we just haven't leveraged those areas, such as PeopleSoft, right? Because of all of the customization, we're caught up in kind of maintaining the customization, but not expanding on some of the features that we might be able to bring to bear that create a little ease on the people and a great user experience. The other piece that I'll share are things like a chat box, right? So when we talk about outreach to students, a question previously and always on our minds, whether it's department program level, outreach, enrollment management, no matter what seat you're looking at, how we engage and connect with our students in a timely manner is really, really important. And so Ocelot is a tool that the State Chancellor's Office has secured, obviously buying power with the colleges across our system to reduce that cost. And this is in connection with the call center. But what's tied to that is a knowledge base, which is really the insight and expertise of our people on the ground in areas like financial aid, admissions and records, categorical programs, residency components that are linked to our admissions and records process. So those expertise or knowledge and answers to how we respond to our students is then input into this knowledge base and can be shared robustly. And so we got to leverage that tool in a way in which we haven't. But tied to that is this chat bot, and it's a reality that anything that we put into that knowledge base can automatically be responded to a student. So if a student asked us at 2 a.m. when all of us are tuckered in or behind our computers catching up on work, they're asking questions, they're up, they're video gaming, they're doing lots of things at that hour, some of them even working. This particular chatbot allows some of the basic questions that we get over and over again to be answered. We don't hold the student up, they move forward. So that would be a technology that would be enhanced to be able to respond to students and certainly minimize some of the pressures on the departments that are responding to the same questions, which is an indicator we're not communicating it very effectively, or we're not communicating it very timely if students are asking the same question. And then tying the loop by identifying what those questions are and looking at our platforms, i.e. website, collateral material, and updating those in a way that is more beneficial to students. So I hope that answered a little bit of it, but I think it's resources there. It's communication across our IT departments, across the board to identify and discuss what are the capacity constraints, and then how could they resolve those together? And then what are the things that are autonomous to a college that it really is an outlier, and how does that continue to be supported? And then the resources necessary to do that. So those conversations are taking place, I imagine, far from complete, far from complete. Others. Please, this is your time. You can celebrate during this time too. Share some amazing things that are happening. You're very welcome. If you all don't brag, I certainly can. Kevin, can I highlight some of the efforts, marketing or otherwise, that are happening to try to recruit our students? Absolutely. So for those of you that track board agendas, right? Some of you do that religiously. Some of you are forced to, like me and Elisa and Olga and others. So with that being said, for those of you that are doing that, you've seen some of the activity coming out of American River College around MOUs, our charters and our K-12s to enhance and increase our dual enrollment pipeline. So one of the ways in which we're doing that, and I feel like I have to give a huge, huge shout out to many of the team members that are working on that. And we talk about Kate and Doug and, Tara and many others that I'm not calling out. And I really, really do thank you. And there are also folks behind the scenes that aren't a part of the interface with the schools, but doing back end work to make that possible from a system perspective and a marketing perspective. So our graphic design part department and IT folks. this is really our opportunity to talk about what does a marketing pipeline look like from a different perspective, right? So, you know, the way that Los Rios, from my perspective, and ARC is situated in Los Rios, I've been at 3 colleges, so I think I might be on something when I have this perspective, but you can challenge me. That the way that we've handled kind of enrollment is by outreach folks. So outreach folks just go and keep banging the pavement and bring in seats. Bring people in to fill up seats. And there's a constant churn in our seats for many reasons, some beyond our control, some within our control. And so there's that churn, and that notion of enrollment management here gets really interesting. And I found it fascinating since I've arrived. We can't manage enrollment through outreach alone. You just can't do that. That's not even a real thing. So anybody that thinks that's not a real thing. One, it's not fair. And if we think about the number of outreach folks we have, I could count them on my hand, right? So you don't have a lot of outreach individuals. So think about what that looks like if that's been the reliance over the years, that those individuals are responsible for bringing students to bear. That's not an okay structure for those individuals or for our community as it relates to our responsiveness. So the dual enrollment pipeline does a couple of things. One, it begins to talk about and create a college-going culture with our K through 12s, our charters within our communities much earlier, especially for our DI populations where some of these conversations either never occur or they occur at the 24th hour when it's time to apply for colleges, right? And I have no preparation, no visioning around what that might look like, what I might be interested in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the reality of it is having that conversation much earlier is about a college-going pipeline. It's about understanding the curriculum needs in partnership with our K through 12s. Our faculty that engage in that process are phenomenal at understanding the curriculum needs of our students and being able to weigh in on that. Have to do more of that work and be more intentional. And my job will be creating the spaces and resourcing those opportunities. So that's one really strong mechanism by which we do 2 things: market, build a pipeline, and also address our equity and social justice agenda, right? So making sure that our students are being represented in the ways in which they're represented in our K through 12 and in our community. So that's one mechanism. I think another thing is we got to do some collateral materials electronically and by hand. So doing postage marketing campaigns is going to be critical as we move towards fall semester, especially with the resources. So some of you may have seen those come in your mailbox as an employee that lives in the service areas, but it's about basically that college doesn't cost a student anything right now at the 2-year because of the HERF dollars, because of the resources that we have. There's an ability for a student to come in, and really what they're paying is their student fee, a health services fee, and those are really it, because we're not parking right now, right? There are a lot of things that we're not doing. And so the reality of it is that campaign has already started. What I would like to see, Kevin, is how we do that more specifically to what a student's intention is. So for example, we have our home bases. If we know a student is coming in and they're going to be connected to a home base, how does my communication now recruit students based on that? When I have a relationship with my K through 12s and I know what their focus is, and I know where students are coming from in our pipeline as it relates to enrollment, how do I talk about marketing as it relates to that school and the focus of that school? So I think sometimes we create marketing campaigns that are kind of widespread. That's not who we serve. There's no broad brush that's going to bring that in. So I think we have some campaigns going. I think we need to drill down a little bit more electronically using that chat box in ways in which are aligned with how our students communicate. And then I think going places where we know families are. A lot of times we go to the high schools. Well, for men of color, for example, they typically aren't making it to the high school, right? Many of their dropout numbers hover around 5th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade. And so if that's the case, well, we're not going to make a lot of inroads in resolving that challenge by going to a high school. So it means that there's different kind of work. So more immersion into the community is going to be critical too. Let's see here. Vicki, now that it has been determined that there is more technology reliance, I think I just answered that one. I got Yours, Kevin. Okay. My department is currently working on a spring 22 schedule. Are there efforts to find out from students if there is a shift in demand online hybrid options? Such a great question. We are guessing. Also, Ad Astra still a thing. And I think that's how you're posing that. That was meant to inform scheduling, and it seems like the data was built and maybe outdated because of the outdated pre-pandemic build. So I think the reality of it is yes, we have the ability to make adjustments to our schedule. I think that there is a survey that's being worked on by our research departments across the district to find out what students' interest is, right? What is the demand? What are the impacts? So that survey is going to go out. Adam has sent it to me yesterday, so your question is very timely. I'm providing feedback on that, and it will be administered. And a part of that is to get what the demand is. And we have a little bit of runway in some respect between now and fall. But by fall, we better have a really good idea about what the demand is so we can make the adjustments. Our instructional deans, chairs, faculty, VPI, AVPIs really took a toll trying to chase what the decision-making process was going to be on reopening to build a schedule. And frankly, we cannot be in that situation again. And so I think the reality of it is that survey will provide us some feedback. And then my goal will be to work with our call center at the district to do really calling campaigns. We need to ask questions because not everybody is going to respond to a survey. And I think it's important for us to understand that our ability to call and chat might be better ways to get a sense of that. And then there's an opportunity for us to do campaigns in our classes for faculty that are open over the summer and being able to pose that question as a part of the classroom experience. And so there'll be multiple ways in which we can do that. Ad Astra, I mean, I think DJ Kali, he allows me to say that, so no disrespect, but Kali is phenomenal and amazing and has done some incredible work there. And I think would probably also agree there's work that has to happen in there. We got some cleanup within our data based on some of the transitions. And so there's work to do, not resolved. It should be utilized and leveraged for scheduling, I imagine to some degree, but probably not actualized in the way in which we would like it to be. So to summarize, we got to do the survey, get the feedback from our students around demand, ask the question of our students around the demand in many different ways, hopefully chat, calling, in classrooms, at counters, or service delivery, and then be able to provide any insight we can to our instructional folks. So our VPIs and teams to be able to incorporate those considerations into the schedule. So I hope that is helpful. Pam. I would like to see highlights of career ed at ARC that lead directly to good paying work in our area. Yes, and I think also the industries that have been devastated by the pandemic, what is our role as a community college to help them rebound, right? And so I think about Oak Cafe and all of our partnerships around the hospitality industry, right? How do we continue to support their ability to bounce back? And that may be by co-marketing things, right? It may be by somehow having our pamphlets and programs connected to some of those places. I think there's a lot of creativity amongst that team. And I think it's about leveraging Scott and Gabe and the PIO team around what are the opportunities, and we may have to secure some resources to be able to do that in a robust manner in partnership with our chambers and others. So great thing to request, great need out there, not only those that are gainful employment that are booming right now, but certainly those that typically have been that are suffering right now. We have to do both, Pam. Thanks, Pamela. All right, Mona, can you tell us more about cluster hiring? What does that mean? When does that start? Is this only the Los Rios employees? Okay, let me level set. Everybody in this space may not have heard of what cluster hiring is, or of course, know what it means. So cluster hiring is a model of hiring or onboarding a group of individuals from a particular community in order to address goals, right? Representation goals of a particular faculty community base. And that can be at the classified or faculty level. The way that it's being described at San Diego is the model by which many are looking at is really around the faculty ranks, right? But it can be applicable. But because of their model, we'll kind of use that as the example. So as an institution, we have looked at, we had a report team, one of our DI project teams do a report on retention of our faculty and staff of color, right? Trying to understand where they're going and more importantly, why they're going, right? What's happening in that particular environment. And then of course, tied to that is representation across discipline service areas of individuals that represent diverse communities, that can represent the students that we serve. And so cluster hires is really about a remedy or solution to that problem. I'll give you an example. Let's say in our history department, we didn't have any African-American folks. And as you all know, just recently brought on an African-American faculty member in January with my hire, same time I came in. But let's say that in history overall, there were just no communities of color. It could be, we'll use Black for an example. A cluster hire would say that within history, you could potentially do a hiring and just bringing in applicants from the African-American community. And of that particular community, there are applicants that are meet the min quals, competent, have skills, and then you're able to meet your strategic goals around representation, while also what some have argued historically doesn't water down a process, right? Because that becomes some of the undercurrent of the conversation. So that's really what cluster hires can do. Cluster hires are possible. It's not a Los Rios thing. So it's out in the world and from our perspective, coming out of San Diego, from the California Community College's perspective, but it happens out in the world. And it's really going to be contingent on a couple of things, right? Our hiring practices right now aren't designed to do cluster hiring, right? And so there are conversations that need to happen around those systems, those structures, those practices, policies. And then there is our department level, right? There's a faculty pro group component in their areas, right? And so there's going to have to be a desire and a will amongst our faculty constituency to engage in these processes to support the representation or the gap thereof representation in a discipline, which means a gap of a thought process, a philosophy, a value, a perspective that may, quite frankly, advantage the department by having that, and that is the perspective. As diverse as the department is, your curriculum reflects that, your students see that, so on and so forth. So that's the answer to that question around cluster hires. There's a lot of pieces to it. I have some interest in it based on some of the numbers that I'm seeing, but there's a lot of conversation that will be had, and there'll be a lot of negotiation that happen in our abilities to be able to actualize that hiring practice and model. So thanks for that question. Others? Don't see hands. I hope I didn't miss any questions, and if I have, please let me know.
Hey, Melanie,
Yes, please, Kevin.
do you have any insight as to whether or not the alternative schedules might be extended again after this coming summer?
Yeah, I'm pretty confident that alternate schedules will be extended through fall semester. And again, because we're remote, makes sense. You can accommodate it and make the adjustments. Obviously, for some of our folks, they'll be on the ground, whether they're considered essential for our impossible to convert courses that are coming down. And so those will be based on schedule constraints that will be the typical process, right? A negotiation with the faculty and the deans, if we're talking instruction area, and then a service delivery based on student needs in the support service areas. But I anticipate that that will be the case, and my presumption is that there will be a communication that extends that out as well more formally for our district. So I'd keep an eye out for the formality piece, which is in writing, but I absolutely anticipate that that will be happening. I also will say, just tied to that, even though it wasn't a part of your question, Kevin, is that we do know that they're wrapping up the policy around remote work, right? And the general kind of gist of that right now is what makes sense to serve students, right? And so there's going to be a lot of latitude based on the blush that I've heard in the conversation I've heard around the draft being developed. That there's going to be a lot of latitude at the local level based on the program or department around what that remote schedule could look like. So for some areas, it may be that it could all be remote, right? For some areas, it may be that there is a hybrid model. So 2 days I'm on the ground, 2 days I'm remote. That's the evolutionary process, and that policy will help drive and shape that. But the parameters are pretty liberal, as I understand, which is really good for us because it allows us to make the determination based on the needs of our students, based on our utilization of our space, and based on the capacity of our employees. You know, the great thing is about organizational health, and those of you that were in my interview process, very important to me. We can't serve students if we're dreading life every day we come in here. That's not a great experience. It doesn't translate well. And so the way that you make that translate well, where students can have pride in their college and have an enjoyable experience, is that employees do. So if we can create models where we can accomplish our goals and our objectives, and employees be happy with the schedule and it meets student needs, why wouldn't we do that? Anything other than that feels slightly arbitrary. So those are my thoughts on that, that you didn't ask for, Kevin, but that I thought I would share.
Bonus.
Others. Well, we have a little bit of time together, and I certainly feel the need to kind of set us up for success as we leave the semester for our faculty going off contract, for our classified professionals, that I am really hopeful that we can get some opportunity to catch our breaths before we go into the summer session. And the same would be true for our administrators. Everybody has worked extremely hard, burning the midnight oil, if you will. And it's been at a really tense time, a time that feels burdensome, emotionally unpredictable, and a lot of unanswered questions, which for most, I'll speak for myself in I terms, creates anxiety, right? To not be able to respond to things that have implications on your families, your own well-being, and certainly our students in our college. So I recognize those things aren't decoupled, right? That you're a whole human, like a student is a whole student, and we got to serve all aspects. So this year, in spite of all of that, incredible work has occurred, and we have to leave this year knowing that. And if we don't know it today, from my words, I hope that for those of you that are able to participate in commencement are able to feel that from your students. At every single one of the cultural graduations that I've participated in, and I anticipate when I go to the celebration of excellence tonight, it will be the same. Students have been so thankful and grateful for your leadership, your adaptability, your patience and compassion and humanity throughout this process. The resources that you all have brought to bear have been far outside your typical responsibilities, I imagine. And for that, I do want to extend my gratitude. What I owe to you is the ability to create the space for conversations about what's next. And so we had some of those conversations over this semester, and quite frankly, really difficult. It was the end of a really difficult year, hard for folks to engage, and we don't want it to be a missed opportunity. One of the things we have to recognize is the conversations continue. It's not 1 hour and we're done and we move on. We got to continue the conversation because not everybody gets to be at the table. And the importance of the executive team of this college is that those that can't be at the table can still understand what's happening. Because if they don't understand what's happening, they can't be a good colleague, they can't be a good educator, they can't be a good service provider. And so with that being said, we will come back as ARC as you know it today. We will come back as ARC having continued conversations about how we need to evolve, because we will have to evolve, no doubt about it. We will continue the conversations that we've had as the executive team about our resources. And are we utilizing our resources in ways that support what it is that we want to do strategically? What we want to do to align our values with our actions, right? We spent this whole semester unpacking a $7 million plus budget to ensure that we're doing the right things with those dollars and making space for the right things when that didn't exist. It's hard work. It's work that was really untangling years and years and years of decision making. And it meant that there were some hard conversations, and we certainly, and no doubt, have more hard conversations ahead. But I'm hoping we do it together. So you all will expect from me a continuation of where we're leaving off today in convocation, what it is that we should look out for in the next academic year, which is what fall semester will bring in the transition of whatever down to the ground means post-pandemic. What does pedagogy and andragogy look like in this environment? That will be Elisa and the faculty to engage in those conversations, and for me and the leadership team to bring resources to bear for those conversations to occur. What does it mean for our classified professionals to understand, and for those that haven't had the opportunity to engage in our equity work, how do they get there? How do we create the opportunities, resources, and space for that to happen? Onboarding will be a very essential element for us to be able to sustain any of our value propositions. And so onboarding will be our focus. We have a new faculty academy. We don't really have anything very structured for our classified professionals. We have orientation for students, not necessarily aligned, and Jazzy and her team, many others, are really doing that work in collaboration with instruction to make sure that we capture and onboard students in a way that's meaningful, sets them up for success. So those are the things that you can expect from Convocation, and then closing the loops on the work that we've been doing. Our DI project teams have done extensive work. We need to tell you all about that work as a college. What is the outcome? Where are we now? What's the status? We have our faculty members and research and working on our program review process. What does that mean? Where are we at? How do you understand that? What are the questions? So conversation is going to be the name of the game as we move towards fall, maybe to a point of exhaustion, maybe over communication if there is such a thing. And then we'll talk about the refinements of how we sustain the things we build together and the things we commit together. And so we know that that's where the resources are going to go. So with that, I want to end our time together by saying thank you so very much for embracing me as your new president at a time that is probably the weirdest, oddest, confusing, emotionally challenged time ever. And I also thank you all for holding me accountable. The wonderful emails I've gotten, even those that critique. A president doesn't come in with a blank canvas. I shoulder the responsibility of what happened before I came. And I recognize that. I hope you all share it with me, hold me accountable to it, but help me come up with solutions for our community. So with that being said, I'm going to answer this question here. Any continued talk about simplifying the hiring process, hiring remotely, is extremely difficult. Understood, spaces on ground will be created, and we will ensure that we have the opportunity, especially in faculty hiring processes for the teaching evaluation. We will make sure that we have the spaces for that and do that responsibly, so we secure the talent and the expertise that we need in our community, for our departments, and for our students. So I appreciate every single one of you for coming. I know it's on top of everything else you have to do. I wish you a wonderful weekend, and I hope you take just at least a little bit of time to reflect back on the year, because next week is a week of celebration. It's the crescendo. It is not only our students moving on, but it is the output of the work. And this year, your work has been hard. So I hope you bask in that glory. Thank you so much. And I wish you all a wonderful weekend. Take care of yourselves. And if you have any other feedback, send it my way. You know my phone number. And if you don't, ask me for it. And you definitely know my email. So please feel free to reach out. Have an awesome day. Thank you for everything you do. Go Beavs. Thank you all.